Omega found a dying baby in the snow. The moment it touched her, the Alpha King's mark burned on her skin. The wind did not ease up that morning. It came in hard, low sweeps across the hillside, carrying ice crystals that stung exposed skin and turned the air white. Sarah Voss had been awake since before dawn, not because she wanted to be, but because the thin blanket she owned did nothing against the cold that crept through the cracks in the walls of the small room she slept in. She lay still for a while, staring at the ceiling, listening to the pack settle itself into the rhythm of a new day. Fires being lit, water being hauled, voices calling across the yard. None of those voices ever called for her. She got up without ceremony, pulled on her 2 sweaters, one over the other, and laced her boots tight. The mirror above the wash basin showed her a face she had long stopped analyzing. Brown eyes, unremarkable. A jaw that was too sharp to be called soft. A nose that was too straight to be called interesting. Her hair was dark, and she kept it pinned back, because loose hair caught in laundry lines and got in her face when she was scrubbing stone floors. Practical decisions. That was what her life had become. A long chain of practical decisions, made by a woman who had no one to make them for her. She was 23 years old, and she was an Omega, which in Asheville Pack meant she occupied the lowest tier of a social order that had been arranged long before she was born. Being an Omega was not simply a rank. It was a word that other people used before they decided how much of your time to take and how much of their attention to give. It meant that when the morning work was handed out, she received the heaviest share and the smallest portion of breakfast. It meant that when the pack gathered for meals, she sat at the far end of the last table, close enough to hear the conversations in the middle of the room, but not close enough to be included in them. It meant that when the healers counted supplies, her name was the last on the list, and sometimes not on it at all. She had not always understood this. When she was small, she had asked her mother about it, and her mother had told her that the world was simply built this way, that there were people who led, and people who followed, and people who kept everything running quietly, so that the leaders could do their leading in peace. Her mother had said this without bitterness, which Sarah found remarkable as she grew older. She herself had developed a very careful relationship with bitterness. She was aware of it, the way one is aware of a wound that has healed wrong. Functional, but always slightly tender. The laundry hall was her first stop. It opened at first light, and it needed to be prepared before the rest of the pack arrived to drop off their things. She filled the basins with water hauled from the central well, 2 trips because the basins were large and the well was far. She stacked the drying boards and organized the lye soap into its proper section on the shelf. She swept the floor. She worked quickly and without thought, because she had done this so many times, that her hands knew what to do, while her mind was free to go somewhere else entirely. Her mind, this morning, went to the festival. The Asheville Winter Festival was 3 days away. It was the largest gathering in the pack calendar, and it drew members from the smaller satellite settlements that owed allegiance to Asheville. There would be food in quantities that the daily routine never saw. There would be music, and fires built high, and lanterns hung along every path through the settlement. There would be, as there always was at the Winter Festival, the ceremony of claiming. The ceremony was old, older than the current pack structure, older than the established bloodlines, older even than the written records the pack elders kept in the archive hall. In it, unmated alphas and omegas gathered in the main courtyard after the evening meal, and the alphas chose their matches, and the matches were made official before the watching community. It was considered a great honor for an omega to be chosen at the Winter Festival. The chosen ones would spend weeks preparing, selecting their best clothing, learning the ceremonial responses, practicing the ritual gestures with their sisters and cousins, and friends who clustered around them in excited groups. Sarah did not have sisters or cousins in Asheville. She had no friends who practiced anything with her, and she had never been chosen at the Winter Festival. She had attended 4 of them in her adult years, and left each one unchanged, walking home alone on the path she had walked alone every other night of her life. The first time it had hurt, in a way she could feel in her chest. The second time it had hurt less. By the 4th, she had understood something that felt less like acceptance and more like the particular exhaustion of a person who has stopped expecting comfort and started simply managing discomfort. She did not hate the festival. She had tried hating it, briefly, when she was 19. Hate required too much energy, and energy was something she needed for actual survival. Now the festival was simply an event she worked around, the way she worked around the cold and the heavy basins, and the ache in her lower back from too many hours bent over laundry. The morning passed. Members of the pack came and went, dropping off bundles, collecting finished loads. A few of them spoke to her. Most did not. A woman named Clara, who had been mated for 2 years, and seemed to want everyone to know it, arrived with a complicated expression and a large bundle. She put the bundle down on the counter and looked at Sarah with the particular combination of pity and discomfort that Sarah had memorized over years of receiving it. "They're saying there may be a royal representative at the festival this year," Clara said. "From the Alpha King's house." Sarah began sorting the bundle. "That would be unusual. Very unusual. There hasn't been a representative from the royal seat at a regional festival in, I don't know. My mother doesn't even remember one." Clara's voice dropped the way voices drop when something important is being shared. "Some of the elders were in the archive hall until midnight last night, searching old records," they said. "Interesting," Sarah said. She meant it, actually. She liked interesting things. They were among the few free things available to her. Clara lingered for a moment, then seemed to remember that she had not come to talk to Sarah, and picked up her previous load. "I suppose we'll see," she said, and left. The afternoon brought more work, this time in the kitchens, where the head cook, a broad man named Gerald, directed preparations for the pre-festival meal, with the focused energy of someone who found purpose in large quantities of food. Sarah peeled, chopped, stirred, and cleaned as directed. She was efficient, and she did not complain. Gerald had once told her that she was the most reliable person in the kitchen, which she suspected was his version of a high compliment, even if it was a compliment that said very little about her as a person, and a great deal about her as a function. She ate her evening meal at the far table. Bread that was good but not fresh. Stew that was warm and filling. She ate slowly, because she was tired, and because slow eating made the meal feel longer than it was, and a longer meal was the closest thing she had to an extended period of rest. Around her, the kitchen filled and emptied. Conversations floated past. The festival dominated everything. Who would be there? Who would be chosen? What the weather would do? Whether the rumor about the royal representative was true, or another piece of gossip dressed as news. She returned to her room as the settlement went quiet. The cold had come back with authority, pressing through the walls as though they were made of cloth rather than stone. She sat on the edge of her bed and looked at her hands in the lamplight. They were capable hands, marked with small scars from years of work. She tried, briefly, to imagine a version of her life in which they were different hands, softer, rested, held sometimes by someone else's hands. She let the image exist for the length of a breath and then let it go. This was something she had learned to do. Not to suppress the wanting. She had tried that and found it impossible. But to allow it briefly and then close the door on it, the way you close the door on a room with no heat. You know the room is there. You simply do not live in it. She put out the lamp and lay down. The wind was still going. She listened to it until she was too tired to listen to anything at all. The next morning arrived with a new instruction. She was summoned to the elders' hall before breakfast, not in the formal way, not with any ceremony, but by a young boy sent to knock on her door and deliver a message in a bored, half-asleep voice. The elder wanted the east wing of the hall swept and the record shelves dusted before midday, as visitors were expected. The east wing was the largest and least frequently used section, connected to the main archive by a narrow corridor, and full of the particular quiet of places that are old and hold their age in the smell of the air. She went. She swept. She dusted. The record shelves were tall and she needed to use the high step stool, which was older than she was, and creaked under her weight with the enthusiasm of something that very much wanted to be noticed. The labels on the oldest record boxes were handwritten in ink that had faded to brown. She read them as she worked, because reading was something she did whenever there were words available. One box, on the highest shelf, bore a label that had been written in a different hand from the others. Firmer. More careful. It read, "Royal Bloodline Seals, Documentation, and Witnessed Accounts." She did not take it down, but she noted it. She finished her work an hour before midday, and left the hall before the visitors arrived. She did not see them come. She did not know who they were. She carried the step stool back to its corner and went to collect the morning's laundry, and the day moved forward around her like water moving around a stone in a river, consistently, without pausing, without asking if the stone had anything to say about the direction of the current. That evening, after the kitchen work and the quiet meal and the walk back to her room, she stood at her small window for a few minutes before undressing. The sky outside was clear for the first time in several days. The stars were very bright. The settlement looked almost beautiful from above, which was the only angle from which most things can be made beautiful, from a distance and from above, with the particulars softened and the shape made clear. She thought about the box of records on the highest shelf, royal bloodline seals. She thought about Clara's voice dropping when she mentioned the royal representative. She thought about the elders in the archive hall until midnight. Something was happening in the world outside her small daily orbit. Something was moving toward Ashvale, or away from it, or through it. She did not know which. She rarely knew. The significant events of the world passed through Ashvale as they passed through every place, with no particular concern for who was watching and who was not, who was prepared and who was simply trying to get enough sleep before the next day's work began. She turned away from the window. She folded her sweaters carefully over the chair back. She lay down. The wind, which had calmed briefly, found its voice again in the night and filled the gaps in the walls with cold and sound. 2 days before the festival, the sky fell apart. The blizzard that came was not the usual winter weather. It came fast and sideways, dropping visibility to near zero within an hour of its arrival. Work in the outer sections of the settlement stopped. The children who ran messages between buildings were recalled inside. The festival preparations, which had been moving along with increasing energy, ground to a halt as everyone waited for the storm to declare itself finished. Sarah, who had been on her way to collect dried linens from the outer drying yard, found herself stuck in the tool shed attached to the laundry hall, watching the world outside turn entirely white. She had her coat, a good one, the best thing she owned. Heavy wool, long, with a hood that actually covered her face when she pulled it forward. She waited in the shed for 2 hours, but the storm did not ease. It worsened. Gerald sent word through a runner that the kitchens would operate on reduced capacity for the evening, and that any staff not already inside should shelter where they were. Sarah read the note twice, and then tucked it into her coat pocket. She looked out through the shed's single small window at the white world. Then she heard something. She was not sure at first that she had heard it. The wind was loud, and it made shapes out of sound, carved things from the air that weren't there. She had heard what she thought were voices in windstorms before, and been wrong every time. She waited, still, and listened. There it was again, very small, very thin, almost nothing, a sound the wind was trying to erase, even as it was being made. She pulled her coat tight, and pushed open the shed door. The cold hit her like something physical, like a wall that moved. She bent her head against it, and walked in the direction she thought the sound had come from, which was toward the tree line at the eastern edge of the settlement, a long dark row of wolf pines that marked the boundary between Ashvale's cultivated land and the open wilderness beyond. She kept her eyes down, because the wind threw snow directly into her face if she looked up. She found nothing on the first pass. She retraced her path and went slightly wider on the second. She was cold enough now that the cold had stopped feeling sharp and had started to feel distant, which she knew was not a good development. She told herself she would do one more pass and then go back. One more. On the third pass, she nearly stepped on it. A bundle, gray and white and half buried in a drift against the base of the largest wolf pine. She might have taken it for a piece of cloth caught in the branches and fallen. There were always scraps of fabric that escaped the laundry lines in high wind, but the bundle moved. Barely. Almost nothing. Just the faintest tremor. The kind of movement that belongs to something alive that has almost stopped being alive. She dropped to her knees and pulled the snow away with both hands. Inside the cloth, good cloth, she noticed even then, fine and woven with care, was a baby. A newborn, from the size of it. The baby's face was the color of pale ash, its lips a frightening shade between gray and blue. Its eyes were closed. Its chest moved in a thin, shallow rhythm that was not fast enough and not deep enough, and seemed to be considering whether to stop entirely. Sarah did not think. She did not plan. She did not weigh her options, or consider the right course of action, or wonder what the appropriate response was for an Omega who found an abandoned infant in a blizzard at the edge of the settlement's territory. She pulled the baby against her chest, under her coat, against the warmth of her body, and she turned around and she ran. She did not find her footing perfectly in the dark. She slipped twice, caught herself, kept moving. The cold was trying to work its way in from every angle, but she kept her arms wrapped around the baby, and her coat pressed close, and her head down, and she ran until she could see the lights of the settlement again, pale and yellow through the white of the storm. She did not pause to catch her breath. She went straight to the healer's building. The healer on duty that night was a woman named Dorothy, who was experienced and competent, and very clear about the parameters of her role. Dorothy opened the door to Sarah's knock and looked at her with the expression of someone who has been disturbed from their work and has opinions about it. "She needs help," Sarah said, and opened her coat enough to show the baby. Dorothy's expression changed. It became something more complicated. She looked at the infant for a long moment, and then she looked at Sarah, and then she said, carefully, "Where did you find it?" "The wolf pine. At the eastern boundary. In the snow." "Whose is it?" "I don't know." Dorothy folded her arms. "Omega, I cannot take in a child with no provenance. The protocol requires that any foundling be reported to the Elder Council before medical treatment is authorized, unless the child's parentage can be established, or a pack member of standing claims responsibility." Sarah stared at her. "The baby is turning blue. I understand that, but I have protocols I am required to follow, and you are not a member of standing, and I cannot." "Tell me which elder to wake," Sarah said. Her voice was calm. This surprised her. She had expected herself to cry, or shout, or both. Instead, she sounded like someone reciting a grocery list. "Tell me who to wake and I will go now. I will be back. But put something warm on this baby while I am gone." Dorothy hesitated for a long, excruciating moment. Then she stepped back from the door. "Come in," she said, briefly. Sarah went in. Dorothy put a warming cloth around the infant, while Sarah stood holding it. Neither of them spoke. The healer's hands were practiced and steady, and Sarah watched them and thought, this is what it looks like when someone has a skill that is genuinely useful. This is what it looks like when the work matters every time you do it. The baby's color, very slowly, began to move toward something closer to living. Dorothy straightened up and looked at Sarah. "I can keep the child warm tonight," she said, and her voice had shifted. Still careful, still bounded by her protocols, but with a thread of something human running through it. "You'll need to go to the Elder Council in the morning. First thing." "I know," Sarah said. She went back out into the blizzard. She walked back to her small room through the white and the wind. She sat on the edge of her bed. Her coat was soaked through and she peeled it off and hung it. Her hands were shaking now that she had stopped moving, and the cold had caught up with her. She did not know whose baby it was. She did not know how it had come to be in the snow at the edge of the settlement's territory. She did not know why no footprints had led away from the bundle. The snow had covered them, she supposed, or they had never existed, which made less sense but troubled her more. She knew she had run through a blizzard to a healer's building and argued with the healer on duty with a calm that did not belong to her, and that the argument had worked, and that somewhere in the warm building on the other side of the settlement, there was a small life that was still continuing. She sat with that for a while. It was not comfortable, and it was not peaceful, but it was real, which was more than she could say for most of the things that occupied her nights. She lay down and closed her eyes, and did not sleep for a very long time. When morning came, the blizzard had moved on. The settlement emerged from its buildings into a world that had been rearranged by snow. Paths buried, familiar shapes changed, the rooftops carrying white loads that bent the edge of every roof into a soft curve. The sky above it all was a clean pale blue, and the air was the kind of cold that is sharp enough to be almost beautiful. Sarah was at the elder hall before the morning bell. The elder she needed was a woman named Grace. In Ashevale, Grace held a position that was difficult to describe briefly, but important to understand clearly. She was not the pack leader. The pack leader was an alpha male named Owen, who handled military and territorial matters. Grace was the keeper of histories, the reader of records, the person to whom all questions of lineage and bloodline and ancient protocol were eventually directed. She was also approximately 80 years old, and had the specific quality of very old people, who have never allowed themselves to be hurried. A settled, comprehensive patience that made everyone around her feel slightly rushed and slightly foolish. She was already awake when Sarah arrived. She was at the long table in the main hall with a cup of something hot and a stack of records, and she looked up when Sarah came in without surprise. as though she had expected this visit and had simply not mentioned it to anyone. Sarah told her everything. The sound in the blizzard, the wolf pine, the bundle, the color of the baby's lips, the healer, and the warming cloth. She told it plainly and in order, and Grace listened with the cup held in both hands, and her eyes on Sarah's face, not moving. When Sarah finished, Grace set down her cup. "You found the child at the eastern boundary," Grace said. "Under the old wolf pine." "Yes. And you touched it. Before it was wrapped. Skin to skin." Sarah paused. She had not mentioned that specifically. The moment when her bare hands had pulled back the cloth, and her fingers had touched the baby's cold face. "Yes," she said, briefly, "when I was uncovering it." Grace looked at her for a long time, not the way people usually looked at Sarah, which was through or past or around, directly at her, with an attention that was weighty and a little unsettling. "Lift your collar," Grace said. Sarah blinked. "I'm sorry?" "The front of your collar. Show me the skin at the base of your throat." Sarah reached up and pulled the top of her sweater aside, exposing the skin above her collarbone. She could not see it from this angle. She would have needed a mirror. But she felt Grace's face change. The color did not leave the old woman's face so much as it rearranged itself, something draining from her expression and being replaced by something else entirely, something older than alarm and more serious than concern. "Sit down," Grace said. Her voice was steady, but thin. "Please." Sarah sat. Grace rose and went to the door and called a name down the corridor. A young aide appeared. Grace spoke to him quietly, and he went away at speed. Then Grace came back to the table and sat down across from Sarah, and folded her hands, and looked at her, with an expression that Sarah would later describe as the look of a person holding a very fragile object that they did not choose to be holding. "Tell me," Sarah said. "Whatever it is, please just tell me." Grace told her. The mark on Sarah's skin, the one she had not yet seen, the one that Grace had seen the moment the collar was moved aside, was not a birthmark. It was not a burn or a bruise. It was a seal. Ancient, unmistakable to anyone who had studied the bloodline records long enough, and extraordinary in a way that changed the air in the room between them. It was the claiming seal of the Alpha King. Grace explained this with the careful precision of a person who has spent decades measuring their words and knows exactly how heavy each one is. She did not embellish. She reached into the stack of records beside her and pulled out a document, old, careful, covered in a script that was firm and deliberate, and placed it flat on the table between them. On the document was an illustration, an exact illustration, drawn in detail by a hand that was no longer living, of a mark that looked like two overlapping circles with a branch between them, and a line beneath that ended in an angular form that might have been a crown. "This was documented 4 generations ago," Grace said, "when the last seal appeared. It has not been seen since, until this morning." Sarah looked at the illustration. She looked at it for a long time, then she looked back at Grace. "What does it mean?" she asked. "It means," Grace said slowly, "that the Alpha King's bloodline has chosen you." The hall was very quiet. Outside, someone was clearing snow from the path with a shovel. The sound came through the walls in clean, rhythmic strokes. "I found an abandoned baby in the snow," Sarah said. "I am a laundress." "Yes," said Grace. "That doesn't make any sense." "No," said Grace. "It doesn't. Not in any way that the existing order prepared us for." She paused. "But the seal does not lie. It does not appear by accident. The histories are very clear about this. The last time it appeared, the woman who bore it was a field worker in the southernmost settlement of the pack. She was not of notable lineage. She was not of notable rank. She was simply the person who was in the right place at the right moment and reached out her hand." Grace looked at the record in front of her, and everything changed after that. Sarah sat very still. She was aware of the weight of her own body on the chair, the feeling of her hands in her lap, the particular texture of the ordinary world that she had occupied all her life, and that seemed, with every word Grace spoke, to be shifting beneath her, without her permission. "The Alpha King will be notified," Grace said. "When?" "It has already been done. My aide has gone to send the message." Grace looked at Sarah with that same direct, weighty attention. "He will come himself. He always comes himself, when the seal appears. The histories are clear on that as well." "When?" Grace's hands tightened slightly over each other. Soon, she said. Very soon. Sarah sat in the silence of the hall with the snow-clearing sound coming through the walls, and the old document on the table between them, and the mark on her skin burning cold and quiet against the inside of her collar, and she thought, with a strange and unprecedented calm, that her life had just turned a corner she had not seen coming, and that on the other side of that corner was a country she did not have a map for. She had never had a map for anything. She supposed she would manage. The day passed in a strange suspension. Sarah went back to her room, changed her clothes, looked in the mirror at the mark on her skin, and stood there long enough for the lamp to flicker twice. The mark was exactly as the illustration showed. 2 overlapping circles, a branch, a line, the angular form at the end. It sat above her left collarbone, with a neatness that seemed impossible. It was not raised. It did not hurt. It simply existed, with the quiet certainty of something that has always been where it is, and was simply waiting to be seen. She went to check on the baby. Dorothy greeted her with the same professional manner as the night before, but there was a shift in it, a careful attention that had not been there previously. The baby was awake, small, and still weak, but awake, its dark eyes unfocused in the way of very young things that have not yet learned to track the world. Sarah stood beside the small warm bed and looked at it. "Do you know whose it is yet?" she asked. "No," Dorothy said. She hesitated. "I sent a description to the elder, along with your report." "I know." Dorothy paused, then said, "The mark on your skin. Grace told me." Sarah waited. "I want you to know," Dorothy said carefully, "that what you did last night, coming out in that blizzard, that was not a small thing. It needed to be done," Sarah said. "Yes, but you did it. That's the part that matters." Sarah looked at the baby's small face. She had not expected kindness this morning. Kindness from Dorothy was an unexpected development. She filed it carefully, in the part of her where she kept the rare things. "I'll come back this afternoon," she said, and she went back out into the cold morning to continue her work. Word spread through Asheville, with the particular speed of news that people cannot quite believe, and therefore tell everyone. By midday, people were looking at Sarah differently, not with warmth exactly, but with a recalibrated attention, as if they were not sure what she had been before, and were not sure what she was now, and were standing in the uncertain gap between those two things, trying to figure out where to put their eyes. Sarah noticed all of it. She kept working. The laundry needed doing regardless of anything else, and the kitchen needed preparing, and the stone floors needed sweeping, and she was the person who did those things. What she could not account for was the feeling that had settled into her chest sometime between the blizzard and this morning. It was not pride. It was not hope, exactly. It was something more raw than both. The feeling of a person who has been told that the thing they thought was ordinary about themselves was not ordinary at all, and is now standing at the edge of that knowledge trying to decide if it changes who they are, or only changes who other people think they are. She did not have an answer yet. She suspected the answer was not going to arrive quietly, or at a convenient time. It was going to arrive, as most significant things did, all at once and without warning. She was right about that. Just before midnight, 3 nights before the winter festival, a sound moved through Asheville. Not a sound exactly, but the absence of sound. A hush that traveled faster than footsteps through the settlement's sleeping corridors and woke people from their beds with no identifiable cause. Sarah was sitting up already, not because she had heard anything, but because sleep had not been available to her, and she had stopped trying to catch it. She heard the boots on the path outside. Not many. 4, maybe 5 people, moving in the specific unhurried way of people who have never needed to hurry, because the world arranges itself around them. She heard the gate open. She heard voices, low and brief. She heard Grace's voice among them. And then another voice she did not recognize, deeper, quieter, with the kind of restraint in it that comes from a person who chooses their words with the same deliberate care they give to everything else. She did not go to the window. She sat on the edge of her bed in the dark and listened to the sound of something enormous arriving, and she told herself, in the plainest possible terms, that fear was an appropriate response to this moment, and that she was allowed to feel it, and that feeling it did not mean she was not also ready. She was, she realized, ready. Not prepared. Preparation was different. Preparation was something you could plan for. Readiness was simpler. It was just the decision to stand up and face what was coming, made at the last possible moment, made quietly, in the dark, before anyone else was watching. She stood up. She put on her sweaters, she laced her boots. She sat back down and waited for morning. Morning arrived without color. The sky above Ashvale was the pale, flat white of a world that had used up all its weather and had nothing left to do but sit still and recover. Sarah had not slept. She had sat on the edge of her bed until the dark thinned to gray and the gray thinned to that flat white, and then she had washed her face in the basin and looked at herself in the mirror again. The mark had not changed. It was there, settled and exact, making its statement above her collarbone with the quiet authority of something that did not need to be loud to be real. She heard footsteps in the corridor outside her room before the settlement's morning bell rang. Not the ordinary footsteps of kitchen staff or errand runners. These were slower, more deliberate, and there were two sets of them, one of which she recognized as Grace's careful, elderly pace. The other was unfamiliar. A knock. She opened the door. Grace stood in the corridor in her formal elder's robe, a charcoal wool garment that Sarah had only seen her wear twice in her life, both times at ceremonies of high importance. Beside her was a man in a dark coat, tall, broad through the shoulders, with a face that was composed with the kind of effort that looks like effortlessness. He was perhaps 30, with dark eyes that took in the room behind Sarah in a single sweep and then settled on her face. Not on the mark, on her face. This was not what she had expected. She had prepared herself, in the small hours of the night, for the particular kind of scrutiny that evaluates and dismisses, the look that people of rank gave to people without it, the look that moved over you like a hand over cloth, checking for quality and finding it insufficient. This man was not doing that. He was simply looking at her, the way one looks at someone when one wants to know who they are and has decided that the fastest way to find out is to look directly. "Sarah Voss," Grace said. "This is Cale Draven, Alpha King of the 5 Packs." The name settled into the morning air with its full weight. Sarah had known it was coming. She had been told he would come himself, and he had come himself. And here he was, standing in the corridor outside her room in a dark coat, looking at her face. "I would like to speak with you," he said. His voice was what she had heard through the walls the night before, low, controlled, with the quality of still water that is very deep. "All right," she said. She stepped back from the door to let them in. Her room was small. It had a bed, a chair, a wash basin, a lamp, a single window. It held the three of them with effort. Cale Draven looked around at once and then looked back at her, and she thought she saw something move across his face, not pity, which she would have found unbearable, but something more careful than that, an acknowledgement, as if he understood exactly what this room said about the life she had been living, and was choosing to understand it, rather than react to it. Grace retreated to stand near the door. The Alpha King sat down in the one chair, without being invited to, without apology, with the simple naturalness of someone who makes themselves at home in any space, because they have never been in a space where they were not welcome. He gestured to the bed, an offer for Sarah to sit. She sat. "Tell me what happened," he said, "in your own words. From the beginning." She told him. She told it the same way she had told Grace, plainly, in order. The sound in the blizzard. The walk toward the tree line, the bundle at the base of the wolf pine, the cloth, and here she said, without knowing why, that the cloth had been very fine, woven with care, and what was inside it, the baby's color, the run back through the snow, the healer's door, Dorothy's protocols. The warming cloth. He listened the way he looked, completely, without interruption, without the small nods and murmurs that people produce when they want to show that they are listening without actually doing it. He was simply still, and the stillness was its own form of attention. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "The cloth," he said. "Describe it more precisely." She described it. Fine weave, dark blue, with a border of white thread at the edges, small, as if made specifically for an infant, tied with a cord that was gray and thick enough to suggest purpose rather than accident. His jaw tightened, just slightly, just once. "And there were no tracks leading away," he said. It was not quite a question. "The snow had been falling for at least 2 hours before I found it. Any tracks would have been covered." "But you searched." "I looked. There was nothing visible in the immediate area. I did not search the tree line beyond. It was a blizzard. I could barely see 3 steps ahead." He nodded. You did the right thing, he said, getting the child warm first. It was the only thing, she said. There wasn't a choice to make. He looked at her directly when she said that. That same look, as if something she had said had landed on a specific point in him and registered there. May I see the mark? He asked. She pulled her collar aside. He leaned forward slightly, not close, not intrusive, simply close enough to see. She watched his face. He looked at the mark the way the doctor in old stories looks at the evidence of a wound, not afraid of it, not excited by it, simply reading it with the care of someone who understands its language. He sat back. He let out a breath that was not quite a sigh. The baby is my son, he said. The room went very still. Sarah held that sentence for a moment, feeling its weight, the way you hold something heavy to check if you can actually carry it. Your son, she repeated. My heir. He was taken from the royal seat 22 days ago, not by outside enemies. By people inside my own house who understood that the future of the 5 packs runs through his bloodline, and decided that the future should run a different direction. His voice was even. It was the evenness of control exercised at great cost. I have had 4 search parties looking for him. None of them found him. None of them came within 40 miles of Ashvale. He was at the tree line, Sarah said, at the edge of our eastern boundary. Yes. Whoever left him there knew the territory, she said. They knew where Packland ended and the open territory began. They left him where he would not immediately be found by a patrol, but where the cold would do the work for them. He looked at her sharply, not in a corrective way, in the way of someone who recognizes a mind working and is surprised, for reasons she found irritating, to find it in the place it was found. Yes, he said, more quietly this time, that is exactly right. And the cloth, Sarah said. It was coming together as she said it, pieces locking into each other, the way cold stiffened joints lock when they finally warm. Fine weave, cord tied with purpose. They wanted him warm enough to survive the journey, but left him in a blizzard with nothing else. They wanted to be certain he would not survive long once he was put down. Yes. But someone who knew the territory that well also knew that pack members sometimes walk the eastern boundary. They could not be certain no one would find him. It was a blizzard, he said. No one reasonable would be walking the eastern boundary in a blizzard. Sarah considered this. I was only there because I was punished, she said. I was sent to collect firewood from the outer yard, and the storm came up while I was working. I cut across toward the tree line to get back faster. She paused. If no one had given me that particular task that particular day, I would not have been anywhere near the eastern boundary. He looked at her for a long, quiet moment. Tell me about the burn, he said. When you picked up the child, what did you feel? She told him. The heat that spread across her collarbone the moment her skin touched the baby's face. The pressure, not painful, like something being pressed into her. The faint glow in the dark that she had barely registered because she was already running. He listened to all of it without expression. The seal responds to what it recognizes, he said when she finished. Not to rank. Not to bloodline, to a quality that it was designed to identify. He paused. The people who built the original protocol for the seal were working on a problem that was common to every royal bloodline that has ever existed. How do you know who to trust, when rank and wealth and beauty can all be performed? When people have every reason to want to be near the king's house, and will do almost anything to get there? The seal identifies something that can't be performed, Sarah said. Yes. What? He looked at her steadily. I don't have a clean answer for that. The histories use words like true care and selfless action, which sound like the kinds of words people write in old documents when they mean something specific, but can't quantify it. He glanced at the mark on her skin. But you went out in a blizzard to collect firewood, which was a punishment task, and on the way back you stopped because you heard something in the wind that everyone else would have called nothing, and you dug through snow until you found it, and then you ran. Not because you knew what it was, because you couldn't not. I already told you that, she said. There wasn't a choice. There is always a choice, he said. People choose wrong all the time. What the seal recognizes is the person for whom the right choice is not a deliberation. It is just what they do. He folded his hands together. You are that person. Sarah sat with this. Outside the window, the settlement had come fully to life. Voices, footsteps, the sounds of the ordinary day beginning. She could hear, distantly, children shouting something about the snow. "What does it mean for me?" she asked. "In practical terms, the seal." He was quiet for a moment. "In practical terms, the seal binds you to the royal bloodline. Not against your will, the seal does not force anything. It announces a connection. What is done with that connection is determined by the people involved." He looked at her face. "In the histories, the seal has appeared 5 times. In 3 of those cases, the person who bore it became part of the royal house. In the other 2, they chose not to, and the connection remained as a mark on their skin, and a name in the record books." "And the Alpha King," she said, "in each of those cases, what did he do?" "He came," Cale said. "He always came in person, and then he made an offer. And you're about to make an offer." "Not yet," he said. "I want to see my son first." Something about the plainness of that, not the statement of a king, but the statement of a father who has been searching for 22 days and has not seen the child in all that time, settled something in the room. Sarah stood. He stood. Grace, who had been so still near the door that Sarah had nearly forgotten she was there, opened it. They walked together through the settlement to the healer's building. People stopped and watched them. Sarah was aware of the watching the way she was aware of weather. It was present. It had weight. It was happening. She did not alter her pace. Dorothy met them at the healer's building door and stepped back without a word. The baby was in the warm room at the back, the one with the heated floor stones and the low light. When they came in, the baby was awake, dark eyes moving without particular focus, small hands working against each other, in the deliberate unconscious way of very young things that are still learning what their bodies can do. Cale Draven stopped in the doorway. Sarah had been watching him carefully since the moment he arrived, building a picture of him from the available evidence. What she saw now was something she had not seen yet: the complete dissolution of the controlled expression. For a moment, a single, unguarded moment, before the control reassembled itself, his face was simply a father's face. Relief and grief and love in unmixed quantities, all at once, without hierarchy. He crossed the room. He sat in the chair beside the small bed. He put his hand very carefully over the baby's small fingers, and the baby gripped his finger with the automatic grip of an infant, and he let out a breath that had been held, she thought, for 22 days. Sarah stood in the doorway and watched this, and felt something she did not immediately have a name for. Not envy, not longing, something closer to witnessing, the particular feeling of being present at a moment that is not yours, and knowing that you were the reason the moment could happen at all. After a long time, Cale looked up. He looked at her across the room, with the baby holding his finger, and Dorothy watching from the corner, and Grace still standing behind Sarah in the corridor. "Thank you," he said. "I already told you," Sarah said. "There wasn't a choice." "I know," he said, "but I would like to say it anyway." She accepted this with a nod. She went back out into the corridor and stood in the flat white morning light, and looked at nothing in particular for a while, feeling the mark on her skin, cold and still and very present, and listening to the ordinary sounds of Ashvale going about its day around her, indifferent and familiar, and, for the first time in a very long time, not quite enough to contain what she was. The Alpha King stayed 3 days. This was not expected. His arrival had been anticipated. The seal made that inevitable. But his departure had been assumed to be quick. Kings moved quickly between places, carrying their authority in portable form, staying only as long as necessary, and then moving on. That was the practical shape of power: dense, efficient, transient. Cale Draven did not leave after 1 day, or 2. He stayed. He occupied the Elder Hall's guest room, which was the largest and most formal room the settlement could offer, and he occupied it without ceremony, leaving his coat over the chair, sending away the 2 attendants who had arrived a day behind him, with suggestions about proper accommodations. He ate in the communal kitchen, which caused a significant amount of careful panic among the kitchen staff, most of which fell on Gerald, who responded by making every meal he produced approximately 50% better than usual, and nearly injuring himself in the process. Sarah did not know what to do with his presence. She had expected him to leave. His leaving would have returned her life to its established shape, altered only by the mark on her skin and the record that would now bear her name. She could have managed that. She had managed far stranger things with no resources. But he was still here, and he moved through the settlement with the particular effect of a person whose gravity is simply larger than the space they occupy. People rearranged themselves around him without meaning to. Conversations shifted, paths curved, and he watched all of it with those still, dark eyes, and said very little, and every few hours he appeared near wherever Sarah happened to be working, not intrusively, not in the doorway blocking way of someone with authority asserting itself, but simply in the way of someone whose feet keep pointing in a particular direction. On the second day, he helped her carry laundry basins. She had been managing both handles of the larger basin herself, as she always did, the weight of it pulling at her shoulders. He had appeared at the corner of the laundry hall and taken the other handle without asking permission. They had carried it together in silence. She had looked at him sideways at one point and found him looking at the basin rather than at her, with the particular concentration of someone doing a small task and doing it properly. "You don't have to do that," she had said. "I know," he had said. And then, "What is it for?" "The winter linens. They need the big basin to soak before the cold sets the stains properly." He had nodded and kept carrying. On the second evening, after the kitchen work and the meal and the quiet, he appeared outside the healer's building at the same time she arrived for her evening check on the baby. They went in together, without discussing it. The baby had gained color, a real color now, alive and present, the ash gray of the first night a memory. Sarah stood on one side of the small bed, and Cale stood on the other, and the baby looked between them with the calm uncertainty of someone who is very new to having a world and is still cataloging it. "Does he have a name?" Sarah asked. "Eli," Cale said. "I named him the day he was born." "Eli." She looked at the baby. Eli looked back. "That suits him." Cale glanced at her. "You've spent more time with him than I have, in recent weeks." "Against my will," he paused. "Tell me what you've noticed." She thought about this. He is very still for a newborn. Most newborns are loud about whatever they need. He watches instead. He will make a sound if he is truly hungry, but mostly, he just watches and waits. She paused again. He trusts his environment to respond to him. He doesn't feel the need to demand it. Cale was looking at her with that direct, weighted attention again. "What?" she said. "That was a very accurate observation," he said, "for someone who has spent a few days with him." "I pay attention," she said, simply. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I know. I've been watching you work for 2 days. You pay attention to everything. The state of the soap levels, which stones in the path are uneven, which kitchen staff are overworked and need to be left alone, and which ones are underworked and need to be directed." "Someone has to," she said. "In most packs," he said carefully, "an Omega, with your level of observation and operational awareness, would be in a management role, not carrying laundry basins alone." She had known this, in the abstract way that you know a thing about yourself when no one around you will acknowledge it. Hearing it said plainly, by the Alpha King, in the warm light of the healer's back room, with Eli watching both of them with his quiet new eyes, it was a different thing entirely. It sat differently. It had weight she was not prepared for. "Ashvale is what it is," she said. "Yes," he said. "But you are not what Ashvale decided you were." She looked at Eli. She looked at the mark on her hand where it rested on the bed rail. She did not trust herself to respond to that directly, so she did not. "Your people are in the archive hall again tonight," she said. "The attendants who arrived yesterday. They've been in there since this morning." "Yes," he said. "They're looking for something specific." "What?" He looked at her for a moment, measuring the question. Then he answered it. "The people who took Eli were not working alone. They were part of a network, connected to at least 2 other pack territories, possibly more. The connection runs old. My people are looking for records in Ashvale's archive that may indicate when the network first established a presence here, and whether the eastern boundary was used before. You think someone in Ashvale helped them? I think someone in Ashvale provided information," he said. "There is a difference." "Not much of one," she said. He almost smiled. It was a very small, almost smile, barely a shift in the line of his mouth, but she catalogued it the way she catalogued everything, as data about who he was and how he worked. "No," he said. "Not much of one. You're right." The evening continued. They talked about Ashvale, about the archive, about the winter festival that was now one day away. He asked her questions in the direct, unhurried way of someone to whom information is simply useful, and not something to be obtained through performance. She answered them the same way, because performance had never been available to her, and she had stopped attempting it before she was 15. At some point she realized that this was the longest conversation she had had with a single person in years that did not involve work instructions or protocol. She filed that realization in the same place where she filed all the things that were too large to look at directly, the place that was not denial but was something adjacent to it. She went back to her room that night and sat on the edge of her bed and looked at the mark on her skin in the lamplight. The festival was tomorrow. The festival in which, every year, the Omegas were chosen or were not. The festival at which she had watched 4 winters pass without a word directed at her. The festival she had stopped dreading and started simply marking on the calendar the way one marks any other recurring event. Tomorrow the festival would begin. The Alpha King of the 5 packs was in the Elder Hall's guest room. His son was in the Healer's building, gaining color by the hour. The mark on her skin had appeared in the record books alongside 4 other names from 4 other centuries, all of whom had stepped out of their ordinary lives and into something that did not have a name in the existing vocabulary. She put out the lamp. She did not wait for sleep. She simply lay in the dark and let the night move at its own pace, carrying her with it. She was afraid. She let herself be afraid. And then, when the fear had said what it had to say, she let the quiet come back, and she rested in it, and morning came, and she got up. The day of the winter festival arrived the way significant days often do, dressed as an ordinary morning, carrying its importance on the inside where it could not immediately be seen. Sarah was in the laundry hall before sunrise, because the festival linen needed to be pressed, and the tablecloths needed to be stacked, and the decorative runners needed to be distributed to the main courtyard, and these were her tasks, and she did them. She worked steadily and without speaking to anyone, because speaking required attention that the work required, and she had learned a long time ago that good work was its own form of meditation. You went into it, and the world outside waited, and when you came out again, you were steadier than when you went in. She had been working for about an hour when one of the Alpha King's attendants appeared in the doorway of the laundry hall. The attendant's name was Owen, not the pack leader, a different Owen, a thin, efficient man who moved with the particular economy of someone who has arranged their entire being around the needs of someone more important. He looked at her with the assessment she had been expecting from his employer since the first morning. "The Alpha King requires your presence," he said. She set down the runner she was folding. "Now?" "When you are ready. He is in the Elder Hall." "I will be there in 10 minutes, she said. The attendant left. Sarah finished folding the runner, set it on the correct pile, washed her hands at the basin, and walked to the Elder Hall. Exactly 10 minutes. Cale Dravin was at the long table in the main room, with a spread of documents and a cup of something hot. He looked up when she came in, and rose slightly from his chair, in a gesture so automatic that she suspected he had done it since childhood, without thinking about it. "Sit down," he said. "I want to talk to you before this evening." She sat. He sat. Between them on the table was a document she recognized. Or rather, she recognized the quality of it, the official seal at the top, the careful ink, the signature at the bottom, that she could not quite read at this distance. "The archive search found something," he said. "My people identified a record from 9 years ago, a record of a transaction, a single payment, made from an account connected to one of the hostile families within my council, to a receiving account within Ashvale's outer financial records. Small, careful, the kind of payment that is designed not to be noticed." He paused. "There is a member of this pack who has been connected to the network that took Eli." She looked at him. "Who?" "I am not going to tell you that," he said. "Not yet. Not because I don't trust you. The seal puts a significant end to any doubt about your character, but because knowledge of this kind is a weight, and you are already carrying more than your share of weight, and it is not necessary for you to carry this one." She considered arguing with this. She decided not to. He was right, and she had enough honesty with herself to know when she was right, and when someone else was. "What do you want to tell me then?" she asked. "2 things. He folded his hands on the table. "The first is about tonight. The festival ceremony, the claiming. People will be watching you differently than they have watched you before. The mark changes your standing, whether Ashvale's existing order accounts for it yet or not. I want you to know that what happens tonight is your evening, your choice, your pace, your terms. No one will pressure you in any direction. If they attempt to, they will answer to me. She felt something odd happen in the back of her throat. Not tears. She had not cried in a long time, and she was not going to begin now. But something adjacent to the thing that comes before tears. A kind of pressure. All right, she said. The second thing. He paused. He seemed, for the first time since she had met him, to be choosing his words slowly, rather than precisely. I would like to ask you something that requires you to understand some history before you answer it. Go ahead, she said. The seal on your skin connects you to my bloodline. Formally, historically, it makes you a recognized figure in the royal record. A woman of documented significance, regardless of pack rank or standing. What the seal does not do is prescribe what happens next. That is determined by the people involved. He looked at her steadily. I want to ask you to come to the royal seat, not as a ward, not as a curiosity, not as a political asset. Eli needs, in the short term, he needs warmth and stability, while I determine who is safe among my own household. You have been the constant in his first days outside that household. He responds to you. He paused. And I would like the opportunity to know who you are properly, without the laundry hall between us. She looked at the table, at the documents, at the cup of something hot that had stopped steaming. That is a very carefully constructed offer, she said. I am a very careful person, he said. I know. She looked up. But care can be a method of avoiding the direct thing. I would like you to say the direct thing. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I think you are remarkable. The seal confirmed what I suspected, but I suspected it before I confirmed it, which means it was not the seal doing the work. I would like to know you better. I would like you to be in Eli's life, and I would like to offer you a place, in my house, in my territory, that reflects what you actually are, rather than what Ashvale decided you were. She looked at him for a long time. The room was very quiet. Outside, the first sounds of festival preparation were beginning. Distant voices, the creak of carts being wheeled into the courtyard. I will think about it, she said. I would like 3 days. He nodded immediately, without surprise. Yes. I have questions. I expected that. Not now, she said. I will bring them when I have organized them properly. He almost smiled again. All right. She stood up. He stood. She looked at him across the table, the alpha king of the 5 packs, with his careful words and his still, deep eyes, and the fact of his son living in the healer's building, because Sarah Voss had walked through a blizzard to the tree line. Tonight at the festival, she said. You will be there? Yes. Then I will see you there, she said, and she went back out into the morning to continue her work, because the table linen still needed folding, and the world did not stop for any of this. The winter festival opened at sundown. The courtyard was lit from every angle. Lanterns had been strung on ropes between the buildings, and their light pooled on the snow in overlapping circles of gold and amber. Fires burned in the 4 stone basins at the corners of the yard, large enough to push back the cold and make the air around them shimmer. The tables were set with the good linens, Sarah's work, pressed and laid flat before she had gone to change into her better clothes. Music came from somewhere near the hall doors, 2 fiddles and a low drum, playing the specific rhythm that everyone in Ashvale had known since childhood, and that seemed, on festival nights, to live inside the body, rather than in the ears. People moved through the courtyard in the way of people at celebrations, not walking exactly, more like floating on the particular current of shared occasion, lifted slightly above their ordinary selves by warmth and food, and the feeling that this particular night was set apart from other nights. Children chased each other between the tables. The older pack members settled into their places near the fires, with the comfortable authority of people who know exactly where they belong. Sarah arrived after most of the others. She had taken her time changing into the best of her 2 good dresses, a dark red one that she had owned for 3 years and worn perhaps twice. She had let her hair down from the practical pin she kept it in. These were not large preparations. They were the small, deliberate ones of a person who is doing what they can with what they have. She did not look for Cale Draven when she entered the courtyard. She was aware of him the way you are aware of a fire in a room, by the heat and the light it throws rather than by looking directly at it. She sat at her usual table, at her usual end, and took a plate and ate. Clara appeared beside her within the first quarter hour. Clara, who had been mated for 2 years and seemed to want everyone to know it, sat down with the energy of someone carrying news. "He's here," Clara said. "The Alpha King. Did you see?" "Yes," Sarah said. "He's watching you," Clara said, not unkindly, with a kind of excited solemnity, as if she was delivering a very important weather report. "Is he?" Sarah said. "Everyone is watching you," Clara said. "You know that, right? With the mark and the baby and all of it?" She lowered her voice in the way she had lowered it about the royal representative back in the laundry hall, which felt like several lifetimes ago. "Some of the women were saying you planned it, that you positioned yourself somehow." Sarah ate another bite of bread. "They can say that," she said. "What do they think the plan was? Walk into a blizzard, find an anonymous baby, touch it in exactly the right way to produce a mark that hasn't appeared in 4 generations, and wait for the Alpha King to arrive?" She looked at Clara. "That would require a very specific kind of genius." Clara blinked. "When you put it like that." "Put it like that," Sarah said. "It's accurate." Clara subsided. She was not unkind, exactly. She was simply someone who had never needed to examine her assumptions, because the world had never made them uncomfortable. Sarah did not hold this against her. She had learned, through the long education of her own particular life, that people who have never been dismissed rarely understand what dismissal costs, and that explaining it is both necessary and largely useless. The ceremony of claiming began after the evening meal, when the fires were at their brightest, and the music had shifted to the slower, formal register of old ritual. The Omegas who were participating gathered in the center of the courtyard, 9 of them this year, young women in their best clothes, their hair done, their expressions a careful balance of excitement and composure. The Alphas arranged themselves at the other end of the courtyard. There were 6 of them, and they moved the way Alphas moved at these ceremonies, with a deliberate gravity that was partly genuine and partly performance, because the ritual asked for gravity, and they were willing to provide it. Sarah watched from her table. She had watched this scene 4 times before. She admitted to herself in the private court of her own mind, dressed each of those 4 times in her dark red dress with something in her chest that was not hope but was shaped like it. She had walked into the courtyard each of those 4 times, and stood at the edge of the gathering and waited, and nothing had happened, and she had gone home. Alone, in the dark, with the music still going behind her. This time was different, and she was not yet sure how different it was, or what to do with the difference. She was aware, as she watched, that the watching had changed. The eyes that turned toward her were not the usual half-attentive glances of people noting a familiar background figure. They were direct, loaded, recalibrated. She felt the mark on her skin, the way you feel a bruise, not painful, just present, marking a boundary between before and after. From across the courtyard, through the crowd and the firelight and the music, Cale Draven looked at her. She looked back. The distance between them was too great for expression to carry detail, but the fact of the looking, direct, unhurried, without pretense, was itself a kind of statement. She looked away first, not because she needed to, because she wanted to. The ceremony proceeded. 3 claiming pairs were made before the music slowed to indicate the formal portion was ending. People applauded each one. The newly claimed Omegas moved to stand beside their chosen Alphas with a contained joy that was very particular to the ceremony. Not yet the joy of actually knowing the person, but the joy of having been chosen, which is its own separate kind of joy, one that Sarah had understood theoretically and never felt directly. She was still watching when the interruption happened. It did not announce itself with raised voices or sudden movement. It came in through the crowd from the direction of the elder hall. 2 men, moving with a purposeful speed that was wrong for the occasion, arriving at the edge of the ceremony space and stopping at a distance that was correct for people with important information and incorrect for people who had been invited to the festival. One of them went to Owen, the attendant. The other went, she was surprised to see, straight to the pack elder. She watched Grace's face as the second man spoke. She was too far away to hear, but she could read faces, and Grace's face said something had happened that could not wait. Grace looked up from the man's face and found Sarah's across the crowd. Just for a moment. Just long enough. Sarah set down her cup. She rose from her table. She moved through the crowd toward Grace, and the crowd opened for her, not ceremonially, but practically, the way it opens for someone moving with clear purpose. Grace met her halfway, with the man who had brought the news still at her elbow. "Come inside," Grace said quietly. "Now." Sarah came. The elder hall was empty of everyone except Grace, the man who had brought the news, and Cale Draven, who had arrived from a different direction, at almost exactly the same moment. The man with the news was breathing too quickly. Not afraid, Sarah thought, but carrying weight. "Tell them," Grace said to him. The man was named Peter. He was a border watcher, one of the small group who monitored the movement at Ashvale's boundary crossings. He had been on his shift at the eastern boundary crossing when, an hour before the festival began, he had observed 2 riders on the far side of the tree line, not on packland, not crossing, simply there, at the edge of the trees, watching the settlement lights. "I wouldn't have reported it," Peter said. He was perhaps 40, with a practical face and steady hands. Riders on the open territory aren't unusual, but one of them was carrying something, a bundle, and when they saw me see them, they moved off fast, not casual fast, the other kind. "A bundle," Cale said. His voice was still even. Sarah had learned to read beneath the evenness now, after 3 days. Beneath it was something concentrated and sharp. "Yes. I can't tell you what it was. The distance was too far for detail, but it was about the right size and shape to be." Peter stopped himself. "I thought you should know." "You were right," Cale said. "Thank you." Peter left. Grace closed the door behind him. "They came back to look," Sarah said. She was not addressing anyone in particular. She was thinking aloud, which she rarely did in company, but the thought was forming faster than she could hold it. "They left Eli in the snow 3 days ago. They expected him to die, and no one to be the wiser, but word got out, the mark on my skin, the Alpha King arriving in Ashvale, the activity in the archive hall. They needed to know if their plan had failed. They came back to see. And they saw the settlement lights," Cale said. "Festival. Business as usual. Except for my attendance." "Except for your attendance," she agreed. "And whatever Peter's patrol schedule looked like. And the eastern crossing being watched." She looked at Cale. "They know now that Eli was found, that you're here." "Yes, he was at the window. He was not looking at the festival anymore. He was looking at the tree line, which was not visible from here, but which existed in the particular way that danger exists, whether or not you can see it." "What do you need?" Sarah asked. He turned. "I need to move Eli before morning. My people are already preparing. The question is the route and the timing and—" He stopped. He looked at her with an expression she had not seen on his face yet, not in 3 days. It was not composed. It was not the careful, deliberate stillness that was his usual register. It was something more direct than that. Something raw. "I need to know you're safe." The room was very quiet. "I've been safe in this settlement for 23 years, she said. "Without anyone looking out for it." "I know," he said, "but the situation has changed. You are in the record books now. Your name is connected to Eli's life. People who would use him as a tool against me could also decide that you are worth using." She had thought of this, not in those exact terms, but she had thought of it. She had thought of it the way she thought of many uncomfortable things, clearly, practically, without the luxury of avoiding it. "What do you want to do?" "I want to ask you again," he said. "To come with us, not in 3 days, tonight." Grace made a small sound from near the door. Not objection. More like the sound of a person witnessing something significant, and choosing to witness it respectfully. Sarah looked at Cale. She looked at Grace. She looked at the door, through which she could hear, faintly, the festival music continuing, the 2 fiddles and the low drum, unchanged, carrying on without the people who had left the courtyard. "My things," she said. "Give me 20 minutes. "I will have someone help you," he said. "I don't need help," she said. "I have very little." She said this simply, without self-pity, because it was simply a fact. She went to her room, and in 18 minutes, she had packed everything she owned into the one bag she had, which was not large and did not need to be. She stood in the doorway of the room and looked at it, the bed, the chair, the basin, the window, and she let herself have 2 full breaths of looking at it before she turned out the lamp and stepped out and closed the door and did not look back. They left Ashvale before the festival ended. The music was still playing when the small group moved out through the eastern gate. Cale, Sarah, the two attendants, a guard she had not previously met, and Dorothy, who had flatly refused to release Eli from her medical supervision until she was certain the transport was appropriate for a newborn and had therefore been incorporated into the plan on her own terms. The night was cold and very clear. The stars above the tree line were the same stars Sarah had looked at from her window on the night after the blizzard, but they looked different from the ground, from moving, from the outside of Ashvale's walls, larger, more present. Eli was wrapped in Dorothy's chosen blankets and held against Sarah's chest because Dorothy had determined this was the warmest arrangement and had said so to Cale without qualification. He had agreed immediately. Sarah walked with the baby held close, feeling his warmth through the blanket, feeling the small weight and the small breathing, and thinking about nothing in particular except one foot in front of the other and the road ahead. Cale walked beside her. He did not speak for the first hour, because she did not speak, and he had shown himself to be a person who understood when speech was not the right tool for the moment. The attendants and the guard moved ahead and behind in the quiet way of people who are very good at their jobs and know when to be invisible. "You did not eat much at the festival," he said eventually. "I ate enough," she said. "I noticed you eat efficiently," he said. "Not quickly. Efficiently. You take the right amount and you don't waste it, and you stop when you have what you need." She looked at him sideways in the dark. "You watch people eat." "I watch everything," he said. "Force of habit. It is one of the advantages of a rank that makes people behave differently around you. They perform what they think the rank wants, and the performance is usually more revealing than the person intended." "What did my eating tell you?" "That you have spent a long time in conditions where having exactly what you need is a victory, and having more than you need is not a reasonable expectation." He was quiet for a moment. "I wanted to say something about that. I have been trying to find the right moment." "Say it," she said. "The life you have had in Ashvale," he said. "The diminishment, the accumulated disregard. None of that was an accurate reflection of what you are. The people who arranged that arrangement were wrong. Not wrong in the way of people who are cruel. Most of them were simply people operating inside a system that had been built long before them, and that they never examined. But wrong is wrong regardless of the mechanism." She carried Eli for a few steps without speaking. "I know that," she said. "I have known it for a long time." "I know you know it," he said. "But there is a difference between knowing something and being told it by someone who has looked at your life and arrived at the same conclusion." She thought about this. He was right. It was different. She had known it, abstractly, the way you know that the world is larger than the place you can see from where you are standing. Having him say it plainly, not as comfort, not as flattery, but as a simple observed fact, was a different experience, a more complete one. "Thank you," she said, "for that." They walked. Eli breathed against her chest. The trees on either side of the road stood tall and dark, and the stars moved slowly through the spaces between the branches, the way they always move, without consulting anyone, without asking permission, without caring whether you were ready or not. Somewhere around the second hour, she realized that she was not afraid. She had expected to be afraid, leaving everything she had ever known, in the middle of the night, to travel with a king she had met 3 days ago, in the direction of a place she had never been. These were the objective conditions for fear. She had them all. And yet, perhaps it was the mark on her skin, which had stopped feeling strange, and started feeling ordinary, the way things do when you wear them long enough. Perhaps it was Eli's weight against her chest, which was its own kind of anchor, something alive and warm and needing. Perhaps it was simply that she had been afraid of small things for so long that large things had a different effect on her, the way a person who has grown up near the sea is not frightened by water. Or perhaps it was the man walking beside her, who had said thank you, and meant it, and kept his word, and moved through the world with a gravity that was uncomfortable and compelling in equal measure. She did not analyze it further. She simply walked, and Eli breathed, and the road continued under her feet, and Cale walked beside her, and that was enough to be getting on with. The royal seat of the 5 Packs was called Greyvale. Sarah had heard the name spoken occasionally in the way of places that are large enough to exist as concepts before you encounter them as locations. Greyvale was a word that meant the center, the seat, the place where decisions that affected everyone were made by people that most people would never meet. She had not spent a great deal of time imagining it. She had learned, early in her life, that imagining places and things she was unlikely to ever reach was an expenditure she could not afford. Now she was traveling toward it, and the concept was rapidly becoming a location. They had traveled for 2 days, resting at a way station in the Middle Territory, a series of stone buildings set into a hillside that she gathered were maintained by the royal house for exactly this purpose: secure stops along routes that the Alpha King or his people used with regularity. The way station had a fire, food, and beds, and Dorothy had used the rest period to do a thorough check on Eli, who responded to the examination with the calm patience of someone who had been handled quite a lot in a very short life and had decided to accept it. The child was, frankly, extraordinary. Sarah had spent enough time with him now to say this with the certainty of observed evidence rather than sentiment. He watched everything. He was rarely startled. He had a particular way of orienting himself towards sound, not the instinctive head-turning of most newborns, but something more deliberate, as if he was gathering data. When Sarah held him, he was still in the specific way of someone who has found a satisfactory location and has no immediate plans to leave it. "He looks like you," Dorothy had said on the second morning, looking between Cale and the baby. Dorothy, who said most things as plain observations rather than evaluations, had said this without particular emphasis. Cale had looked at the baby for a moment and then said, very quietly, "He looks like his mother." Dorothy had not asked about this. Sarah had not asked about this. But the information was now in the room, a fact that had not been there before. There was a mother, or had been one, and she was not here, and that absence had the particular shape of loss rather than absence by choice. Sarah had filed this in the place where she was keeping all the things about Cale that she was accumulating gradually and not yet sure what to do with. The folder was getting heavy. She was managing. They arrived at Greyvale on the afternoon of the 3rd day. The approach to the royal seat was along a road that widened as it went, the way all important roads do, as if the road itself is preparing you for what is at the end of it. The buildings began sparse and spread out, the settlement structures of the outer territory, and then grew more dense, and then there were people on the road, actual traffic, which Sarah had not been in the middle of in a long time. Ashvale was quiet. Greyvale was not quiet. Greyvale was the particular noise of a place where a great many people live in proximity, and have decided to get on with it. She did not flinch. She looked. The royal house itself sat at the top of a long slope at the center of the settlement, surrounded by a wall that was decorative in design, but functional in reality, thick enough to matter, high enough to mean something, with gates that were open and guarded simultaneously. Inside the wall was a courtyard larger than Ashvale's main square, with a building attached to it that was several stories of stone and dark wood, old in the way of things that have been maintained rather than replaced. She carried Eli through the gates. The guards at the gate looked at her, and then at Cale, and did the quick mental calculation that people do when they see an unexpected figure in an unexpected place, and are deciding whether to ask about it. They decided not to. The Alpha King had arrived with this woman, and that was sufficient. Inside, the household staff materialized with the efficiency of a system that had been waiting. People were introduced, and tasks were assigned, and rooms were directed toward, and through all of it, Cale moved with the specific focus of someone who is home, and who has a great deal to do, and intends to begin doing it immediately. He paused once, in the main corridor, and looked back at Sarah. "Your room is on the 2nd floor," he said. "North side. It has a window that faces the hills. I thought you would prefer that to the courtyard view." He paused. "Am I wrong?" "No," she said. She had not expected to be thought about in terms of window direction. "You're not wrong." He nodded, and continued down the corridor. She was shown to the room by a staff member named Helen, who had the brisk, organized manner of someone who takes pride in the quality of her work, and measures that quality carefully. The room was large, not enormous. Sarah would not have known what to do with enormous, but large by any measure she had used before, with a wide bed, a proper wardrobe, a desk, 2 chairs, and the window Cale had mentioned, which looked out over the far edge of Greyvale and the hills beyond, blue and gray, and exactly what she would have chosen. She stood at the window for a long time after Helen left. The hills did not look like Ashvale's hills. They were different in shape, rounder, more settled. But hills at a distance have a consistent quality, regardless of location. They exist at the scale where human concerns become less visible, and the geography of the world becomes more so. She had always found this useful. Not comforting exactly, more like calibrating. A reminder that the scale on which human problems exist is not the only scale available. She was in the royal seat. She had a room with a window that faced the hills. Below her, somewhere in this building, Eli was being settled into the nursery that his life had been supposed to begin in, 22 days ago. Cale Draven was in some other room of this building, doing the work that a king does when he has been away from his seat for 3 days, dealing with matters that are not administrative. And somewhere between here and Ashvale, 2 riders were processing the news that the plan had failed. She thought about that for a while. Then she unpacked her bag, which did not take long, and washed her face in the basin, and went to find Eli. The nursery was on the 2nd floor, south side. It had been arranged with obvious care and had clearly been made ready some time before the abduction, before the 22 days of searching, before all of it. The furniture was good, the linens were warm, the light was correct for a room where someone very young was going to spend a great deal of time looking at things and forming their first understanding of what the world looked like. Dorothy had installed herself in the adjoining room with the efficiency of a person who does not ask permission for necessary actions. Eli was in his bed, awake, doing what he did, watching the ceiling with the patient attention of someone studying a text. Sarah sat in the chair beside the bed. She did not pick him up. She was simply present, which seemed to be what he wanted most, company without demand. She sat with him until the light changed toward evening, and then she went to the dining room for the meal that Helen had said would be at 7, and Cale was there at the head of the table, and 3 staff members were there at the other places, and the meal was eaten with the reasonable conversation of people who have shared a journey and are now sharing the transition to whatever comes next. After the meal, Cale said, "I would like to take some of your evening, if you have it." "I have it," she said. They went to the room that was clearly his working space, a study, large, with books on 2 walls and a fire going, and papers on the desk, and the smell of old wood, and something that might have been cedar. He gestured to the chairs by the fire. They sat. "I need to tell you about the council situation," he said. "Before tomorrow, when it becomes more complicated." She listened. He explained it with the precision she had come to expect from him. No unnecessary detail, no performance, simply the relevant facts arranged in useful order. His council was composed of 9 members, representatives of the 5 packs and their subsidiary territories. Of those 9, he had identified 3 who were connected to the network that had taken Eli. 2 of them had already been removed from their positions pending formal proceedings. The 3rd had fled before he could be reached. The formal proceedings would begin within the week. The 3 were not acting on personal conviction, he said. They were contracted by a larger group whose identity I am still working to establish. The payment records that your archive helped us find are the clearest evidence we have so far. The payment 9 years ago, Sarah said. That was a long-term arrangement. They were not planning this recently. They were building toward it. Yes, he said. 9 years is a long investment. That means they have a specific goal, not just disruption, a specific outcome they have been working toward for at least 9 years. Yes. The succession, she said. If Eli is gone, the succession question opens up. If it opens up, whoever has positioned themselves correctly has a claim. Yes, he said. He was watching her with that direct attention again. You arrive at the shape of things quickly. It is not complicated, she said. It is simply a matter of following the chain of who benefits. Most people don't follow chains, he said. They look at the immediate event and stop there. She looked at the fire. I spent a long time in a life where no one told me anything directly, she said. You develop the habit of reading the things that are not said. Following the chain beneath the surface, she paused. It was the only way to understand what was actually happening around me. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I want you to be part of this, the investigation, not because of the seal, not because I feel obligated to include you, because your mind is useful and you see things that I want in the room when decisions are being made. She looked at him. You want me on your council? Not formally, not yet. That would require a series of steps that the current situation does not allow for yet. But informally, in this room, in these conversations, as someone whose counsel I trust. He paused. If you are willing. She thought about Ashvale. She thought about the long days in the laundry hall, the careful small existence, the years of being precisely as much as the settlement decided she was. She thought about the box on the highest shelf of the archive, with its record of royal bloodline seals. She thought about the sound in the blizzard, the wool cloth, the baby's blue lips. "I am willing," she said. He nodded once. Something settled in his posture. Not relief exactly, but a completed thing. As if an open question had been answered and he could now proceed. "Good," he said. "We start tomorrow." She went back to her room with its hill-facing window and lay down in the wide bed that was the largest bed she had ever been in, and looked at the ceiling. She was not afraid. She was not overwhelmed. She was simply very awake, with the particular aliveness of a person who has moved from one version of their life to another and is still in the space between them, feeling both the loss of the familiar and the pull of the new. She fell asleep eventually, and she slept deeply, and in the morning, she got up and washed her face and went downstairs to begin. The challenge arrived on the 4th morning after their return to Greyvale. Sarah was in the study with Cale and 2 of his remaining loyal council members when the message came. The messenger was formal, which was itself a kind of signal. Informal messages arrived by ordinary courier. Formal ones came with a specific knock, and a sealed document held correctly in both hands. Cale read the document without expression. He set it down on the desk. He looked at Sarah. "It is what we expected," he said. He said it to her, not to the council members, which was itself a thing that did not go unnoticed. She reached across and took the document. She read it. The challenge was submitted by a council member named Frederick Hale, representing the interests of a group that called itself the Reform Faction, the kind of name that sounds orderly and reasonable, and is often chosen deliberately for that reason. The document was very well written. Whoever had produced it had access to a skilled legal mind. It argued, in courteous and precise language, that the mark on Sarah's skin was either misidentified or fraudulent. It cited historical precedent for mark misidentification. Apparently this had happened twice in recorded history, both times in regional packs, without direct access to the original documentation kept in the Royal Archive. It called for a formal review by the full Council of Elders from all 5 packs, convened within 14 days. "It is not an attack," Sarah said, putting the document back down. "Not directly. It is a delay." Cale looked at her. "If the review takes 14 days to convene, and then the proceedings themselves take additional time, and meanwhile, the questions around succession and legitimacy are in formal dispute, that is the outcome they want, not the disproof of the mark, the distraction, the ongoing public uncertainty." "Yes," said one of the council members. His name was Arthur, and he was a thin man of 60, with the eyes of someone who has been in politics long enough to recognize every move in the game. "Precisely. They cannot disprove the mark, they know that. They want the argument itself." "Then we do not give them the argument," Sarah said. Both council members looked at her, Arthur with surprise. The other one, a woman named Helen who was no relation to the Helen who managed the household, with something closer to assessment. "If we comply," Sarah said, "we are already engaged in the frame they have built. 14 days to convene. Further time for proceedings, during which Frederick Hale's group controls the narrative. The story becomes, the king has returned with an omega of uncertain standing who claims to bear a mark of royal lineage, and the legitimacy of this claim is being investigated. That story is designed to be damaging regardless of the outcome. So we counter-request," Arthur said slowly. "We call for the review, but on our terms and our timeline. We call for it within 3 days," Sarah said, "not 14. We invite all 5-pack elder councils simultaneously. We make the authentication public, not a closed proceeding, an open one, because the mark does not need closed-room verification. It does not need to be protected from scrutiny. The more scrutiny, the better." Cale was watching her with his hands folded on the desk. He was not interrupting. "The open proceeding removes their best tool," she continued. "They are counting on time and opacity. Speed and transparency are the direct opposition to both." The council member Helen said, "The risk is that something goes wrong in public. An open proceeding is harder to control." "Yes," Sarah said, "but we have the advantage of being right. The mark is genuine. I have been told this repeatedly by people who know the records, and who have nothing to gain from saying so. In a closed proceeding, the right answer can be delayed indefinitely. In an open one, it cannot be avoided. Silence in the study. Cale looked at Arthur. Arthur looked at Helen. Helen looked at the document on the desk. "She's right," Arthur said. He said it simply, and with the admission of someone who recognizes a correct answer, and is not interested in arguing against it for form's sake. 3 days, Cale said. He looked at Sarah. "You understand that means you stand in front of the assembled elders of all 5 packs in 3 days?" "Yes," she said. "They will ask about your rank, your history in Ashvale. They will use every piece of it to suggest you are not what the mark says you are." "I know," she said. "I have spent 23 years being told I am not what I am. 3 days is short notice, but the subject is familiar." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned to Arthur. 3 days, make it happen." Arthur made it happen. The invitations went out that afternoon, carried by 7 separate couriers, to the 7 elder councils of the 5 packs, and their subsidiary territories. The message was precise, and courteous, and entirely clear. The Alpha King invited the elder councils to convene at Greyvale in 3 days, for an open authentication of the royal seal that had appeared on the skin of Sarah Voss of Ashvale Pack, the woman who had retrieved his son from the snow. The response time was faster than any of them expected. By the following morning, 6 of the 7 councils had confirmed their attendance. By afternoon, the 7th had as well. Frederick Hale sent a formal response expressing his group's cooperation with the expedited timeline and his confidence in the process. Sarah read this and recognized it for what it was. A retreat dressed as cooperation, submitted by people who had expected more time and been denied it. She spent the 3 days preparing. Not in the way of someone performing preparation, not reviewing scripts or rehearsing responses. She spent the 3 days in the study, reading the historical records around the seal. She spent them with Dorothy, who had opinions about everything and expressed them clearly and was therefore useful. She spent one evening with Cale, going through the specific arguments Frederick Hale's document had made and working through the responses to each, not because the responses were complicated, but because doing the work was its own form of steadying. On the evening before the proceedings, she sat with Eli for an hour. He was awake, as he often was in the evening. She held him and he was still in the way that he was still with her, and she looked at his small face and thought about the wolf pine, and the snow, and the cold, and the moment when she had pulled back the cloth and touched his face, and the world had rearranged itself without her permission. She looked at the mark on her skin. It was exactly as it had been from the beginning. 2 circles, a branch, a line, the angular form at the end. She had looked at it so many times now that it had stopped being remarkable and become simply true, the way the shape of your own hands stops being remarkable after a certain number of years and becomes simply what you have. "Whatever happens tomorrow," she said to Eli, who was not yet in a position to respond, but who was watching her face with his particular attention. "You are here. That happened. Nobody can make that not have happened." He blinked once, slowly, as if he agreed. She went to her room and slept without difficulty, and in the morning she rose and dressed and went downstairs, and the day of the proceeding arrived, and she was ready. The great hall at Greyvale had not been used for a formal proceeding in 11 years. Sarah could tell by the way the staff moved through it the morning of the convening, with the particular careful energy of people managing a space that is important and seldom required, and therefore always in a state of readiness that they hope not to need. The tables had been arranged in a configuration she had never seen before, a central open space, with tiered seating for the elder councils on 3 sides, and a single standing position at the center, which she understood was hers. She looked at it and did not look away. The elders arrived through the morning in small groups, traveling with their own attendants and their own guards and, in some cases, their own archivists, people who carried record boxes with the careful attention of those for whom paper and ink are a form of authority. They were from every territory of the 5 packs, and they brought with them the different air of their different places. The coastal elders who smelled of salt and moved as if they had learned their pace from tidal water, the mountain elders who were quieter and denser in their manner, as if they had been compressed slightly by altitude, the plain elders, the forest elders, and the others from the territories that did not have a single easy name. Grace had come from Ashvale. Sarah had not known she would be present, and the sight of her, small and gray and contained in her formal charcoal robe, was the closest thing to comfort the room offered. Grace caught Sarah's eye when she entered, and gave her the look she had given her in the archive hall, on the morning of the first telling, direct, weighty, and entirely steady. Frederick Hale arrived with a group of 4 advisors. He was a tall man, well-dressed, with a face that had practiced pleasantness for so long that pleasantness had become a kind of default expression, rather than an actual state. He looked at Sarah, when he entered, with a very brief, very controlled attention, cataloging her, assessing her, deciding where to put her in his understanding of the day. She looked back at him with no particular expression. Cale entered last, from the east door, with Arthur and Helen and 2 guards, and took the Alpha King's position on the raised platform at the north wall. He did not look at Sarah when he entered. She understood why. The proceeding required the appearance of neutrality from his position, and looking at her would not support that. She did not need him to look at her. She knew he was there. The senior elder from the mountain territory, a woman named Ruth, who was the oldest person in the room, and moved as if she knew it, and found it a reasonable condition, opened the proceeding with the formal language of centuries of pack law, language that was old enough to be beautiful in the way of things worn smooth by long use. Then she called Sarah to the center. Sarah walked to the standing position. She stood in it the way she stood in all positions, upright, grounded, present. She had no script. She had decided against a prepared statement, because prepared statements create the impression that you were afraid of not having the right words available, and she was not afraid of this. "You are Sarah Voss," Ruth said, formerly of Ashvale Pack, 23 years of age, unranked Omega. "Yes," Sarah said. "You carry on your person a mark that has been identified by witnesses as the royal bloodline seal of the Alpha King's lineage. Yes. This proceeding exists to verify that identification." "Yes," she said. "I am in favor of it." A small sound moved through the assembled council members. Not a laugh exactly, but the precursor of one, a collective exhale of recognition. Frederick Hale's expression did not change. Ruth asked her to show the mark. She pulled her collar aside. Several of the elders leaned forward. 3 of the archivists opened their record boxes simultaneously. The air in the room was very focused. An archivist from the southern pack, a young man with careful hands, brought out a reproduction of the historical documentation. He placed it beside the mark, close enough to compare. He straightened and looked at Ruth. "Concordant," he said. "In all specifics." Ruth nodded. She looked at Sarah. "Describe, in your own words, the moment of contact." Sarah described it. She told the story that she had now told several times, to Grace, to Cale, to the attendants, but she told it as she always told it, without rehearsal, which meant it came out fresh each time in the way that true things do. She did not perform the details, she simply reported them. When she finished, Frederick Hale's senior advisor, a compact man named Edward who had the vocal precision of someone who had spent decades in legal chambers, rose to speak. "We acknowledge the mark's visual concordance with the historical documentation," Edward said. "Our argument has never been against the existence of the mark. Our concern, which we believe any responsible council member should share, is the question of provenance. The mark appears. We all see that. The question we are asking is, under what conditions did it appear? And specifically, was the individual who bears it aware, at the time, of the mark's significance and the potential advantages it could confer?" The hall was very quiet. "The suggestion," Ruth said, for the benefit of the broader room, "is that the bearer may have known enough about the seal to engineer circumstances that would produce it." "That is a precise statement of our concern, yes," Edward said. Sarah looked at him. Then she looked at Frederick Hale. Then she looked at Ruth. "I would like to answer that," she said. Ruth gestured for her to proceed. "To engineer the conditions you are describing," Sarah said, "I would have needed, first, advanced knowledge of the historical seal and its triggering conditions. I am an Omega from the outer tier of Ashvale Pack. I work in a laundry hall. I have never had access to the Royal Archive or to the Elder Council's records. Grace can confirm that the relevant documents are kept in a restricted section that I have never entered." She paused. "Second, I would have needed to know that the Alpha King's infant son was going to be abducted and deposited at the eastern boundary of Ashvale Pack in the middle of a blizzard, which would require me to have been involved in the abduction planning, which would require me to be connected to the network that spent 9 years building toward this event. which would require me to have been engaged in this plan since I was approximately 14 years old. A longer silence. Third, she said, I would have needed to produce a mark that the archivists have just confirmed is concordant in all specifics, with documentation created 4 generations ago. Documentation that is handwritten, historically precise, and not easily replicated, and which I have never seen. She looked at Edward directly. I went into a blizzard to collect firewood. I heard a sound. I followed it. That is the entire extent of my prior planning. Frederick Hale's pleasant expression had gone still, not stiff. That would have been visible and therefore interesting. Simply still, in the way of someone who had prepared for arguments and found, instead, a clear account. Ruth looked at the other elders. She looked at Grace, who met her look with one of her own. She looked at the archivists with their concordance notes. Are there additional questions from the assembled councils? Ruth asked. There were questions. 3 elder councils had questions, all of which were reasonable, and none of which Sarah found difficult, because reasonable questions about real events have answers that present themselves when the events actually happened the way you are describing them. She answered each one with the same precision, not defending herself, simply reporting. There is a difference, and the difference matters. Defense implies vulnerability. Reporting implies confidence in the facts. After the last question was answered, Ruth called for the authentication vote. It was the specific procedure from the historical records. Each elder council cast one collective vote, for or against authentication, and the result was read immediately. 7 councils, 7 votes. 6 authenticated, 1 abstained, 0 voted against. Frederick Hale's faction had not even voted against. They had abstained, which was the intelligent retreat of people who understood that a vote against would be on the record, and a record against a royal bloodline seal was not something you wanted to carry. Ruth stood. She was old and small, and her voice carried to the back of the hall without effort. The mark borne by Sarah Voss of Ashvale Pack is authenticated as a genuine royal bloodline seal, she said. The bearer is entered into the royal record as a recognized figure of documented significance within the lineage of the Alpha King of the 5 Packs. The hall absorbed this, then it exhaled. Grace caught Sarah's eye from across the room. She gave her one small nod. Sarah gave her one back. Frederick Hale and his advisors left the hall without speaking to anyone. No one watched them go. After the hall emptied, Cale found her in the corridor outside the east door. The attendants and the council members were at a distance, giving them the space that people give instinctively to 2 people who need a moment that is not shared. He looked at her for a moment without speaking. The controlled expression was in place, as it generally was in public, but around the edges of it, in the set of his jaw, in the particular stillness of his eyes, she could read the rest of it. She had gotten better at this over the past days. She could read him now the way she read most things, by looking at the evidence and following the chain. That was exactly what you said it would be, he said. Yes, she said. Edward was good, better than I expected. But good arguments about false premises are still arguments about false premises. The question about your prior knowledge. Predictable, they had nothing else. He was quiet for a moment. How are you? She considered the question. She had been asked it periodically throughout the days she had been in Greyvale, generally by Helen, the house manager, and occasionally by Dorothy. Each time, she had answered it practically, fine, tired, less tired, adequately rested. She was not sure Cale was asking the practical version. I have been in front of 6 rooms today, she said. The study this morning, the preparation room, the hall, the authentication, the elder group that wanted to speak privately after, and this corridor. I would like to be in a room with no one in it, except possibly Eli. He almost smiled. She had come to recognize the almost smile as a complete thing, not a smile that had been stopped part way, but a smile that lived entirely in the preparation, like a piece of music that exists in its opening notes. I will have Helen arrange something, he said. Tell her I don't need arranging, she said. Tell her I need Eli, and quiet, and whatever is in the kitchen. Yes, he said. All right. She started to move down the corridor. Then she stopped. She turned back. When they were in the hall, she said. Before the vote, when Edward said what he said about prior planning, you didn't react. No, he said. That must have been very difficult. He looked at her directly. Yes, he said. It was very difficult. I noticed, she said. Thank you for not reacting. She left him in the corridor and went to find Eli. The nursery was warm and quiet. Dorothy was in her adjoining room, visible through the open door, writing something in the precise manner of someone who documents everything as a matter of principle. Eli was in his bed, awake, watching the ceiling. Sarah sat in the chair. She did not pick him up immediately. She sat and looked at him and let the day drain out of her the way water drains, slowly, until the level was manageable. Then she lifted him and held him, and sat in the chair by the window that faced the south garden, and outside the window the afternoon light was doing what late afternoon light does in winter, which is to arrive sideways and turn everything slightly gold before giving up entirely. She thought about Ashvale. She thought about the laundry hall. She thought about the thin blanket and the far table, and the 4 winter festivals, and the sound of music that she had walked home from alone. She did not think about them with grief. She thought about them with the specific clarity of someone looking at a map of a road they have already traveled, useful now only for the understanding it provides, not the direction. She thought about what Ruth had said, in the hall, the royal record, a recognized figure of documented significance. She turned the words over and looked at them from several angles, the way you look at something you have found and are not yet sure where to put. She thought about Cale, in the corridor, saying yes, it was very difficult, without defense or diminishment. She thought about the mark on her skin. She looked at it, with Eli in her arms, in the sideways gold light. It did not look different than it had looked on the first morning, when Grace had asked her to lift her collar, and she had not yet known what it was. It looked the same. But she was not the same person who had looked at the document on Grace's table, and said, "That doesn't make any sense." That person had been somebody who expected the world to make sense in ways that matched the size of her life. She was somebody different now, and the size of the life was different, and the something that didn't make sense had turned out to make a very specific and particular kind of sense after all. 3 weeks passed. 3 weeks in which Grayvale became, incrementally and without a single announced decision, a place where Sarah lived, rather than a place she was staying. The change was small at first. She began keeping things in specific locations, rather than in the careful non-commitment of a temporary guest. Her books on the desk shelf, her coat on its own hook by the door, her morning cup left on the windowsill because it was the most convenient place, and she was always at the window in the mornings. She learned the names of all the household staff, not from a list but from presence, from being in the kitchen when the cooking happened, in the halls when the cleaning happened, in the courtyard when the day began. She took on the task of organizing the Royal Archives record room, which had been in a state of functional disorder since a reorganization attempt 3 years ago had been abandoned halfway through. She did it because the disorganization was obvious and irritating, and she had the skills for it, and because she had learned a long time ago that the most honest way to inhabit a space is to be useful in it. Cale came to find her in the archive room on the 7th evening. She was on the high step stool, a better one than Ashvale's, this one solid and 3-legged, replacing a section of the financial records in their correct century order. "You didn't have to do this," he said, from the door. "I know," she said. "Hand me that box." He picked up the box from the sorting table and carried it to the base of the step stool. She took it from him. She put it in its correct position. "You are reorganizing the entire room," he said. "The third period records were filed incorrectly under the second period," she said, "which means anyone looking for third period information would miss it, or find it accidentally, or give up and conclude it didn't exist. That is an operational problem." "Yes," he said. "It is. For what it's worth, 3 archivists have been trying to solve it for 2 years. They were overcorrecting," she said, "trying to build a new system, instead of using the one that was always there, and had simply been displaced." She climbed down from the step stool. He was there when she descended, not directly in her way, but close enough that the step down placed her briefly at his height, and they were for a moment at exactly eye level with each other, in the warm light of the archive lamps. He did not step back. She did not step away. "I want to ask you something," he said. His voice was at the register she had learned was his most direct, not the public voice, not the controlled room voice, but the private one that came out in specific moments. "Ask," she said. "Are you staying?" he said. She looked at him. She looked at the reorganized shelves, the correct order restored, the third period records in their correct location where anyone looking for them could find them. She looked at the door of the archive room, beyond which was the corridor, and the nursery, and the room with the window that faced the hills. "That depends," she said. "On what?" "On whether staying is for Eli," she said, "or for the record, or for some other reason." "Those are not the only options," he said. "I know," she said. "I was waiting for you to say so." He was quiet for a moment. The archive lamps hummed their small, steady sound. Outside the room, the household was winding toward its evening. Footsteps, distant voices, the sounds of a place settling itself. "I have been thinking about what to say for several days," he said. "I am not a person who finds it easy to say the direct thing about the direct thing. I find it easier with arguments and strategy and operational decisions. The personal register is more difficult." "I noticed," she said. "I imagine you did." He looked at her steadily. "Sarah, I would like you to stay, because this house has been better since you have been in it. Because Eli is calmer and more settled, and not only because of your presence with him, though that is part of it. Because the archive room is now correctly organized. Because you told the assembled councils the truth in a voice that did not waver, and that was, from where I was sitting, the most impressive thing I have watched a person do in a long time." He paused. "And because I think about you when I am not thinking about work, and I have not done that in a very long time." She looked at him for a long time. She looked at the mark on her skin, and then at his face. "I am not easy to be around," she said. "I say what I think. I reorganize things that need reorganizing, without asking permission. I have no interest in performance, and very little patience for it." "I know," he said. "I will continue to do all of those things. I know. And I have conditions." Something moved in his expression. "Yes," he said. "I expected that. I want a role in the council work. Real work, not a consultative gesture. I want access to the archive unrestricted. And I want—" She stopped. She looked at the shelves. Then she looked back at him. "I want to be seen as what I am. Not as the Omega from the outer tier, with the unusual mark. As myself. Whatever that requires in the record books, or the official documentation, I want it to match what is actually true." "Yes," he said. Immediately, and without qualification. She absorbed this. "All right," she said. "All right?" he repeated. "I am staying," she said. "For my own reasons, which include all of the things you said, and also the view from my window, and the fact that Eli looks at me like I am the most reliable thing he has found yet, and I am not willing to disappoint him." The almost smile appeared. This time it went slightly further than it usually did. Not a full smile. She suspected full smiles were rare from him, and were therefore worth more than frequent ones, but further than before. "Your own reasons," he said. "Always," she said. She picked up the step stool, and moved it to the next section that needed attention. He stayed in the room, which she had not asked him to do, and which she did not ask him to stop doing. He began, without comment, to hand her the boxes as she needed them. They worked until the lamps needed refilling, and then Helen came and refilled them, and they worked a little longer, and the archive was, by the end of the evening, in the most correct order it had been in for 3 years. The months that followed moved with the particular rhythm of a life that is expanding. Not dramatically. Expansion done dramatically is usually followed by contraction, but steadily, in the way of a river that is widening its banks by persistence rather than by flood. The formal council proceedings against the network members concluded in the 8th week. The case was thorough. Sarah had worked on the documentation alongside Arthur, and had found 3 additional financial records in the newly organized archive that connected the network's activity to a period even earlier than the 9-year payment, stretching it back closer to 15 years. The conclusion was swift once the evidence was presented. 3 members were removed permanently. The fled member was located in a territory beyond the 5 PAC's direct authority, but was named in the official record, which served the purpose of closing the question publicly, even if the person could not be immediately reached. Frederick Hale's reform faction quietly dissolved, not with any announcement. They simply stopped meeting, stopped issuing correspondence, stopped existing as a named entity. Sarah watched this happen, and noted it with the satisfaction of someone who has followed a chain to its correct end. Eli grew. This was the most significant operational development of the entire period, from Sarah's perspective. He was, at 2 months, genuinely himself, a person with a specific character, already discernible beneath the soft formlessness of very young infancy. He was still and watching and patient, and when he chose to make a sound it was precisely timed, as if he had decided to speak and was now doing so with full commitment. She spent part of every day with him, reading to him in the evenings because she liked to read, and he liked to listen, and the two requirements were compatible. She was present the first time he laughed. It was a morning in the 5th week, and she was in the nursery with him, and she had been making the faces she had discovered he liked, exaggerated expressions, deliberately overwrought, which she performed without self-consciousness, because Eli's opinion of her dignity was the only one in the room, and he had never judged it negatively. He had been watching her with his usual attention, and then something in his face had changed, and the laugh had come out, small, surprised, delighted, unmistakably a laugh. She stopped what she was doing and looked at him. "Yes," she said, "exactly." He laughed again. She sat down on the edge of the bed and laughed with him, which she had not done. Laughed, genuinely, freely, without the careful management of it, in a very long time. And when she was done she sat in the quiet of the nursery with Eli watching her, and she looked at her hands in her lap, and the mark on her skin was there as it always was, quiet and present, and the life outside the nursery window was going on in all its ordinary complexity. She thought about the wolf pine. She thought about it in the way you think about the beginning of a thing that has become your life, with a specific gratitude that is larger than the thing itself because it is actually gratitude for everything the thing led to. She thought about the sound in the blizzard, small, thin, almost nothing, at the edge of hearing. She was glad she had followed it. Cale came to the nursery that evening, as he did most evenings, and they sat on either side of Eli's bed and talked about the day, the council correspondence, the archive work, the administrative decisions that needed making, the news from the outer territories. They talked about these things with the ease that had accumulated over months of conversation, in rooms that were not public rooms, in which no one was watching, and no one needed anything performed for their benefit. At some point, the conversation slowed, and they sat in the quiet of the room, with Eli sleeping between them. "I had a letter from Grace this morning," Sarah said. "How is she?" "Good. She says Ashvale is adjusting. The new person in my old role in the laundry is apparently very slow, which she tells me in the way of someone paying me an indirect compliment." He smiled. The full one. She had seen it more frequently now. It arrived with less advance notice, and stayed longer, and she had concluded that it was not rare exactly, simply reserved. For this room, for this hour, for this specific configuration of people. "I want to go back to Ashvale at some point," she said. "Not to return, just to go back, see the wolf pine." "Yes," he said, "we should do that." "In the spring," she said, "when the snow is gone." "In the spring," he agreed. They sat. Eli breathed in his small, even way. The fire in the nursery made its sounds, the soft percussion of wood and heat, and outside the window, the winter sky was full of the same stars she had looked at from her room in Ashvale, from her window, that had faced nothing in particular, in the life she had lived before the sound in the wind. She thought about a thing Cale had said to her, weeks ago in the archive room, in the lamplight. She had been thinking about it in pieces ever since, turning it over at different angles. He had said, "The seal recognizes the person for whom the right choice is not a deliberation. It is just what they do." She had carried that with her. She had been carrying it through the proceedings and the council work, and the evenings in the nursery, and the mornings at the hill-facing window. She had been trying to understand whether she believed it, and what it meant about her if she did. What she had arrived at, after all those weeks of carrying it, was not a conclusion exactly, but an understanding. The mark had not made her anything. It had not changed the quality of her attention, or the precision of her thinking, or the refusal in her chest to walk past the sound in the blizzard. Those had all been there before. The mark had only named them, and made them visible, and put them in the record books. The record books were important. She understood now, more than she had in Ashvale, that names in record books shaped the world in which other people moved. She had lived for 23 years as a woman whose name was in the record of functions and tasks and assignments, and the life that record built around her had been narrow and heavy and managed with the careful efficiency of someone who knows they have very few tools available. Now her name was in a different record, and the life being built around it was wider and more demanding, and in almost every way harder, and in almost every way better. She looked at the mark on her skin. She thought about the woman who would carry it for the rest of her life, the Omega from the outer tier, the laundress, the woman who went out in the blizzard. She was glad to be her. She had not always been glad to be her. She was now. Eli shifted in his sleep, making the small sound of someone rearranging themselves inside a dream, and she and Cale both looked at him at the same moment, and then looked at each other across the small bed, and neither of them said anything, because nothing needed to be said. And the fire continued, and the stars continued, and the night continued, carrying them gently forward into the spring that was coming, and the wolf pine that was waiting, and the rest of a life that had begun, improbably and precisely, at the edge of the tree line in a blizzard, with a sound so small it was almost nothing. She had followed it anyway. That was the thing. She had always followed it anyway.